And welcome back to the 2020 Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. And we are very pleased to have with us a longtime friend of the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. John, I think you've probably either been to every one, but certainly you were at the first one and here during many of the early years. John Gizzi here, many years worked for the venerable publication Human Events, and now is the Washington, D.C. correspondent, the White House correspondent, which has to be interesting under this president, for Newsmax. We are hopefully going to be joined by Dr. Paul Kangor here in a minute or two. But first of all, John, welcome back. It wouldn't be a PLC without you here. It just wouldn't be right. So we're so glad that you could be with us. And
I wouldn't be me without PLC. As you said, Lohman, I was present at the creation at the very first Pennsylvania Leadership Conference back in 1989.
Yep.
And I still remember when I was asked to be a panelist by our friend Jim Panyard. And in those days, you did not have the net, you did not have email, you didn't have texting. So when I got there, Sue Staub, the panel moderator,
yes,
had no background on me, and she said, "You better introduce yourself." And I said at that point, "My name is John Gizzi. There'll be a short pause for you to say, 'Who cares?'"
Yeah, and of course, we're all missing Sue Staub, who
Yes.
Regrettably passed away here over the past year. We're going to do an in memoriam on her tomorrow. But those early days of the PLC were quite exciting and quite interesting, especially coming after the Reagan years. But now we have the Trump years, and you have a front seat to history here, to what's taking place. And my first question to you, John, is just, have you ever seen anything like this before?
Well, I never thought as a White House correspondent I'd be putting in for combat pay, but this is what it is. You sense an air of hostility in the press room, not just from reporters, but certainly from press secretaries, and you can say it's justifiable. Anger in some cases, in other cases it's petty and unjustified. But while this is true of past press secretaries I've dealt with, and I'm now on my 12th, it's not been to the degree that we're seeing on television when there are press briefings. Some call it even beat the press. But I would point out that it's also an exciting time because Donald Trump, whatever you think of him, is different from any other president in history. He's the first president who never held elective or appointive office before he took the position. He is somebody who has only tangential ties to his party. He's actually contributed more money to Democrats than Republicans. And many say he's not fixed in his ideology, although, again, conservatives who support him say with great passion, he always delivers on what he says. The obvious case in point being the Supreme Court justice he's going to announce tomorrow night.
This is interesting. I'm glad you brought up the whole issue of the Supreme Court. Expectations, maybe a bold prediction from John Gizzi as to who the president might pick. And is the Senate really, first of all, did they have the backbone to actually put this nomination into the committee, have it come out of the Judiciary Committee, run the vote, get this done in the next couple weeks? Do you think the Senate will actually do that?
I'm going to answer your questions, all four of them, backwards.
Okay.
Yes, 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 and Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
Oh, very good, very good. Tell us a little bit about Judge Barrett. She was highly touted the last time when Justice Kavanaugh was the pick.
In fact, President Trump wanted to name her to the vacancy that Anthony Kennedy made possible with his retirement, and was persuaded, I am told, that her nomination would raise considerable controversy in the midterm election year. She has a long paper trail, not unlike the late Robert Bork or Justice Clarence Thomas. You know her thoughts on many things. She has some controversial statements, such as she does not believe stare decisis, letting the decision stand with a precedent, is sacrosanct. And, of course, she's a devout Roman Catholic, charismatic Catholic, in fact, and a mother of 7 with 2 adopted children from Haiti. In other words, she's quite a unique personality, as well as having a finely jeweled legal mind. She is sure to set off a protracted and argumentative and very stormy confirmation process. That said, the expectation is the president will name her Saturday evening. The hearings will begin the following week before the Senate Judiciary Committee, where Americans will see Lindsey Graham as chairman and Kamala Harris as a member of the committee. And they are expected to be wrapped up based on the precedent of Supreme Court appointments within 2 weeks. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is likely to move for a quick vote, so she could be confirmed in the 3rd week of October.
Now, we saw with Justice Kavanaugh and that confirmation fight where it got nasty, personally nasty. Now you have likely, well, we will have a female appointee, Judge Barrett, or perhaps another person, likely Judge Barrett. So now you're going to have a woman. Can the Democrats savage a female candidate in the same way they did Justice Kavanaugh, or would that really backfire in terms of the woman vote here with the presidential and U.S. Senate races?
When the assault was launched against Clarence Thomas in 1991, Justice Thomas, polls showed, had strong and growing support among black Americans nationwide. And if you notice the vote, he had Republicans voting against him, but virtually every Democrat from the South voted for him. I suspect the polls among black voters had something to do with that. Regarding a woman, I don't put anything past those who don't want to see a Trump appointee on the Supreme Court. So I would say one can expect it. And as sort of a sneak preview of what to watch, I suggest you go back and get the videos of her confirmation hearings to be on the U.S. Court of Appeals in 2017, in which her charismatic Catholicism was brought up, and one senator referred to it as her dogma.
Well, we are pleased that we have joining us now from Grove City, Pennsylvania, Dr. Paul Kangor. Dr. Kangor, of course, is a noted author. He has another new book out. There he is down there in the corner. Paul, good to see you.
Guys,
Paul has a new book out, The Devil and Karl Marx, which I'm sure he would appreciate everybody buying. But he also is, of course, with the Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College. And John, I'll turn it over to you and Paul now to talk about the current state of the conservative movement.
Thank you, and it's not only a pleasure, but an honor for me to share the stage, albeit virtually, with Dr. Paul Kangor. We are always told that the young people today are losing a sense of history or don't even have it. And I think as long as they have professors such as Paul Kangor, they will always be imbued with history. That is a specialty. And I will tell you, I was very moved by a column he did some years ago about Martin Luther King actually going into East Berlin and not only preaching at 2 Lutheran churches, but defending the United States and not at all embracing communism as many of his enemies feared he would do. That was an outstanding column, Paul, and thanks for reminding us about this side of Dr. King that we don't hear about.
Oh, well, thank you, John. In fact, I wrote a piece this week for the American Spectator, and I quote Martin Luther King Jr. condemning communism. And I used that, and in fact, he said the biggest problem with communism is that it's materialistic and atheistic. And that's something that I wish that the leaders of BLM, Alicia Garza and Patrisse Cullors would. We say that we are trained Marxists. That's something that I wish that they would understand. And as Loma knows, one of the things that I point out in this book on Karl Marx is that Karl Marx was a complete racist as well. So the idea that any civil rights leader would identify as a Marxist is kind of ridiculous. Maybe a communist, but not a Marxist of all things. Well, but it's good to be back with both of you guys.
Let me start with an historical note. 1964 and the years preceding it are seen as sort of the embryonic period of modern conservatism. Barry Goldwater's book, Conscience of a Conservative, embodied the themes of Edmund Burke and Russell Kirk and others. National Review was taking off as a publication. Human Events certainly was in those days. And conservatism basically meant to all just what it said: smaller government, greater freedom, and a defeat of communism. Over the years, we've had different conservative factions. People refer to themselves as paleoconservatives, neoconservatives. Give us a quick synopsis on the state of conservatism as it is today.
Well, that's a good question, John. In fact, recently somebody said, oh, I don't agree with Kangor. He's a neocon. And I thought, a neocon? Me? Why? How? What? And I emailed back, and he said, well, you supported the George W. Bush in the Gulf War, the invasion back in 2003. And I said, well, okay, all right, yeah. Does that mean I'm now a neocon? And by the way, what is a neocon? Right, John, in 2020, how would you even define a neocon, right? Maybe we could sort of define it around the Gulf War issue in 2003, but I don't know how you would define it today. And to go back to 1964, the year of the Goldwater candidacy, Ronald Reagan's Time for Choosing speech, really Russell Kirk, even Edmund Burke, right? But a conservative seeks to conserve and preserve, right? So the question is, what do you conserve? And like Kirk said, well, you conserve, like Reagan said as well, the timeless truths, the time-tested values and ideals, not just simply anything from the past, but the ideas, the ideals, the values over time, the biblical absolutes, the natural law, the moral absolutes that are here and endure for good reason because they're right and because they're true. You don't just support slavery because slavery is in the past. This is it's a bizarre misconception, but I hear it a lot from people who are liberals. You conservatives want to conserve and preserve anything from the past. No, that is not true. You reject the ideas from the past that are not timeless truths. So a good question today, and John, I know you wrestle with this as well, is how do you define a conservative in the year 2020? And with the Trump presidency, here we are in the state of Pennsylvania, and if Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania, it's going to be probably because of guys in Western PA in the fracking industry who used to be Democrats, blue-collar Democrats. If you go right down my street, right here, and you hang a left, there's a gigantic sign on the sign of a building, a guy who builds race cars. And John, you'll appreciate this. It says, buy American, hire American, and then vote. It would have said 30 years ago, vote Democrat. Now it says vote Trump. Right. So Donald Trump has those voters in a way the Democrats used to own them, and the Republicans couldn't win them. Although there are a lot of Reagan Democrats in 1984 that voted for Reagan of that type. But those people are now firmly Donald Trump. Right. And that's something that reflects a shift in the Republican Party, maybe some elements of quote unquote conservatism. But it certainly reflects a major shift in the Republican Party in the year 2020. And it's probably going to be decisive for the state of Pennsylvania in the 2020 election.
Well, let me take this a step further. Largely because of Barry Goldwater's vote against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Republicans have had a difficult time getting back to the 30+% of the vote that they captured among black Americans under Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon in 1960. He got about 37% of the vote against Jack Kennedy. Now you have a president who is portrayed as hostile to the black community and yet talks extensively about opportunity zones and what he hopes to do to improve the livelihood and the opportunity for black Americans. My question is simple. will he be able to break the years-long onus against conservative and Republicans among blacks and go higher than the 8% of the vote he received in 2016?
I'll tell you, John, that's not much of a bar to surpass, is it? 8%.
Well, Trump surpassed the bar set by Romney 4 years earlier.
Yeah, so I would have said 2 years ago, or even a year ago, yes, because the economy was doing so well. It's rebounding again now, kind of in the third quarter, post COVID-19 dive in the first and second quarter of 2020. So I would have thought a year ago, 2 years ago, yeah, thought he would have improved on that. Then 8 weeks ago, I would have said, no, he's in big trouble. But I don't know, John, I'm seeing some numbers now, maybe you are too, that suggest that Donald Trump will pick up among the black vote, also among the Latino vote as well. And it is, from a historical point of view, I think this has been one of the saddest things that's happened to the Republican Party. Black Americans were so solidly Republican. I mean, all the leaders of the NAACP, 80, 100 years ago, this was the Lincoln effect. Again, speaking of Pennsylvania, right? Gettysburg, the Gettysburg Address. They remained solidly Republican until the FDR years, till the Roosevelt years, and then also drifted further away with LBJ, 1960s, 1970s. Ronald Reagan really made some nice overtures to the black community. I could show you pictures, statements where he's meeting with everybody from, Rosie Greer to Meadowlark Lemon to Michael Jackson and
Muhammad Ali
in the 1980s. Yeah.
Go ahead. The other question, just turning to foreign policy, you mentioned earlier your support for the Gulf War, and I would just like to mention that we are seeing a debate that's ongoing in Washington among conservatives. President Trump, for example, must have said for the umpteenth time he wants to end endless wars. And that's a cry one finds in the conservative movement quite frequently. He's sending out a message, I think, to a base within the Republican Party. And he goes a step further by naming the names of those who would like to continue what he calls endless wars, notably House GOP Conference Chairman Liz Cheney, to name a recent example. What is the U.S. going to do in the future about these wars? In particular, what are conservative Republicans going to do with this clear dichotomy on the issue?
Well, that's a great question, John. And really, this is kind of where the conservative coalition post-Cold War has really started to fall apart, right? I mean, in the 1970s, 1980s, it was anti-communism, fighting the Soviets. That's what really held the conservative coalition together. And we saw this with Pat Buchanan's challenge in 1992, and this is where the kind of the old right, the paleo conservatives began the split throughout the 1990s. George W. Bush would look back at the 1990s and refer to it as years of repose, right, between what he called the shipwreck of communism and the day of fire, between the Berlin Wall, 1989, and September 11, 2001, where we're trying to figure out what is our place in the world. If you look back at the Clinton years, foreign policy, what was it? What would we do, right? You had the Balkans, the war in the Balkans, 1988. It's really hard to define anything very clear. And then, as George W. Bush put it, 9/11 happened and that changed everything. So he pursued a more activist foreign policy, certainly in the Middle East. Read his National Endowment for Democracy speech in November 2003, where he quotes Woodrow Wilson, FDR, Ronald Reagan's March of Freedom, and says, we're going to bring the March of Freedom into the Middle East. This area that hasn't had democracies, we're going to create the first two of them in Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein's Iraq. We're going to transform the Middle East. Well, now that's gone. And, Donald Trump has, we pretty much pulled at least most troops from Iraq and Afghanistan. He promised that we would not get engaged in any wars in the Middle East. I think, John, the Middle East under Trump is something that he's not getting enough credit for among the international community, certainly among liberals, among the dominant press. We just had an amazing peace agreement between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, where those are the first two Arab countries to recognize Israel's right to exist since Jordan in 1994, since Egypt at Camp David. There had only been two since the three no's in Khartoum back in 1967. There had been only Jordan and Egypt. Trump just added two weeks ago, last week, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and there could be even more that could come along.
Right.
So the Middle East piece is something that I think Donald Trump is not getting due credit for at all. People are going to want to talk about COVID and the economy and Supreme Court picks. That first debate with Mike Wallace or whoever it is, they've got to talk about the Middle East because there's some real signature Trump accomplishments here, which I think goes back to you. How will this affect the Jewish vote? Really, Trump ought to be able to improve, I would think, on those numbers from 2016 with the Jewish vote.
Richard Nixon in 1972 certainly increased the Republican performance among the Jewish vote, and Ronald Reagan, I believe, got 40% the first time he ran, even after Carter presided over Camp David. So the chemistry is definitely there to do it with these accomplishments. I might add, last week I interviewed Nadim Gemayel, a member of the Lebanese parliament and the son of the late President-elect Bashir Gemayel, who was killed by a suicide bomber nearly 40 years ago, 38 years ago to be exact, and was headed toward making Lebanon an independent country and kicking out the outside meddlers. Young Mr. Gemayel told me that Donald Trump certainly has a warm place in the hearts of those who want an independent Lebanon and want groups such as Hezbollah out, because the Iran treaty that he ended, that Obama started, and that's been a source of encouragement to the Lebanese who want a free and independent Lebanon.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. In fact, there's some news today on that. And yeah, what's happened to Lebanon and Beirut since the 1970s, when the PLO first pulled out of Jordan and started building terrorist camps in Lebanon. I mean, John, you and I are old enough to remember this. The Ronald Reagan would refer to what happened at the Marine barracks in Beirut as the worst moment of his presidency. Yes. When, what was it, about 240 U.S. Marines were killed by an Islamist suicide bomber.
Right.
Yeah, and they took a beautiful country, beautiful city. Beirut was known as the Paris of the Middle East, and quite literally blew it up. So it's been rebounding ever since. And yeah, there could be even movement there with the Middle East. So what percentage of the Jewish vote did Donald Trump get in 2016? I don't think it was more than 30 or 33, 35.
No, I don't recall, but if he got that high, that would be a marked improvement over what Mitt Romney received and what John McCain received, and George W. Bush for that matter. But this is going to be a new and uncharted territory for Republicans. Now, as you mentioned, you and I are not as young as we used to be, so let's look at the present and the future right now. Mario Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian author, once said, "Uncertainty is a flower whose petals have yet to be picked." We are facing some uncertain times ahead. If Donald Trump is reelected, do you see changes in conservatism in terms of the ideology and who it's appealing to?
Well, I mean, here's where I'm going to be quite negative. I think we've really blown an opportunity here to teach conservatism over the past 4 years. And one of the reasons why I was supportive of Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, I know a lot of people watching this don't like Marco Rubio because of what he did in immigration and so forth. But those two guys really understood and could articulate conservatism. They knew it really well. And, I think case who could articulate conservatism. Now, he may be pursuing some policies and so forth, certainly in economics, free markets for business, that are good for conservatives. And by the way, cultural issues, he's been tremendous on abortion and religious liberty. I would have never expected that. That's a complete shock to me. I didn't believe it when he said it in 2015 and 2016. Right. Yeah, but he's been great on that issue. Right. So, but I do think we've lacked in what we had in Ronald Reagan, and look, we lacked it in George W. Bush as well. Someone who really can use the bully pulpit as a way to kind of preach and teach conservatism. And I'm seeing, John, young people, especially young conservatives, or maybe I should say would-be conservatives, aren't really there because they don't really truly understand what conservatism is. They're getting a caricature of it in their universities and from the left. And so I would really like to see more forceful and clear teaching on what conservatism is from the leader of it, which would be the leader of the Republican Party, would be the president.
Well, let me give you the obverse of that question now, Paul. If Donald Trump were to lose, does conservatism go back to what it was, which is conserve and preserve, and have some friendly disagreements, or I should say friendlier disagreements, about the degree of foreign involvement? Or does Trumpism, a populist nationalism, survive as a force?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's a very insightful question. There would be a continuity, ironically, of all things, on cultural issues, religious liberty issues again like abortion, and I would not have thought that. So whoever would pick up from that, whether it would be a Cruz, a Rubio, a Nikki Haley, Scott Walker, maybe perhaps, I don't know, I haven't thought about 2024, or Mike Pence, right? So there would be a continuity there with no problem. The tougher issue would be some aspects of economics. Trump's a free marketer. It's really clear. I mean, he wants lower taxes. He wants economic growth. He wants to help business. Trade is more difficult. And Trump is kind of a bit more of the Buchanan wing of, I don't know, we shouldn't call it protectionism, right? But Trump would say he's fighting for fair trade to allow for free trade. So the battle against China isn't about undermining trade, but it's about opening trade in order to have a more of a level playing field. And that's what he believes with NAFTA, too, with renegotiating NAFTA. So maybe there'd be some issues there on economics, but the big one would be in foreign policy. And I got to tell you, John, in all honesty, today in 2020, I don't know how you define a conservative foreign policy. I really don't. I could have told you at one point that it was about opposing communism, opposing the Soviets. That's gone. It's still about opposing communism. But I'm not sure what a conservative foreign policy really would even be, how it would be defined in the 2020s.
My final question to you is going to conclude where Lohman began, the Supreme Court. We've seen the nature of justices of the court become a critical issue, if not an imperative, and certainly with conservatives and with those on the left. I've reported in Newsmax, and it's no great scoop, that the president in all likelihood will name Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the court. Do you see this setting off a firestorm with both sides, and what would be the long-term impact of the confirmation of a Justice Barrett?
Yeah, I agree with you on this, John. I've had people tell me since the Kavanaugh hearings that Amy Coney Barrett is next. And somebody told me that about 2 months ago. Very high-level person in the judicial area. I can't say anything more than that Amy Coney Barrett is next. So I expect her to be named. It's going to be an absolute culture war. They're going to portray her as a snake handler and a fanatic. And the way that that the left is going to attack her on her faith, her very devout Catholic faith, I think is going to bring Donald Trump the Catholic vote. And that's it. Trump got the Catholic vote in 2016. This is Pew Research numbers, 52 to 45. And all of that came in late in the last 4 weeks, especially after the moment of the debate with Hillary Clinton when he was asked the partial birth abortion question. And he said, kind of classic Donald Trump, right? Nothing sophisticated, no quoting of natural law. He said, Hillary thinks you can abort a baby right up to the final trimester, and I just think that's wrong. I just think it's wrong. Right? It was kind of that at the heart answer that appealed to people. And he won the Catholic vote 52 to 45. He won white Catholics like 60 to 36, I think.
Right.
Catholics can go to Mass weekly or more. I think it was almost 65-35. So by picking Amy Coney Barrett, this is going to be a culture war issue. It's going to help them with the Catholic vote. And I don't know if you saw this, John and Loman, but Donald Trump and Melania Trump showing great class by going and paying their respects to Ruth Bader Ginsburg at her coffin. Mm-hmm. And the way that the feminist women in the audience shrieked and screamed and yelled is one of the most vicious, nasty, uncharitable, classless things I think I've ever seen.
Yes.
And to watch that video for 2 minutes of Trump and Melania with their faces covered with their masks, trying to endure the hissing and booing and shrieking from that crowd when they were simply trying to pay their respects to a woman that they disagreed with, that is one of the most nasty things I've seen in politics.
Yeah.
And yet that's important of what's to come over the next few weeks, if and when he nominates Amy Coney Barrett, or if he nominates the Catholic woman judge from Florida.
Barbara Lagoa, yes. Right.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, this has been a wonderful exchange. I could probably go on for another hour, but I don't think Loman would like that, nor would our crew. Let me just point out that John Kennedy once said, when the sun is shining, that's the time to paint the roof. And the fact is that we will soon have an election and we'll be in an odd-numbered year. This is a time for conservatives to have conversation, to talk about differences, and to move on with a philosophy, as Ronald Reagan said, of bold colors and no pale pastels. And of course, conservatism will change, new people will come in, but essentially it is the same philosophy that we learn from the past. And as George Santayana said, of course, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Paul Kangor, thank you very much.
You're great, John. I wish I was there with you and Loman to go have a beer, but I guess we can't do that. Not this time, maybe next year.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
That's a promise.
Take care, guys.
Okay.
All right, you got it.